Good afternoon, everybody. It's Maria Sanchez-Keene here from the Center for Organizational Effectiveness on our 7th webinar in the Fundamentals and Practical Leadership for New and Emerging Leaders. Our focus today is on improving outcomes, essential evaluation, and quality improvement tools. Today, we have the pleasure of having Gerda Zonreuter, who is the Senior Research and Evaluation Consultant here at the Center. Gerda brings with us tons of experience, and I know that you will learn a great deal from her. So let us go through and talk about what we are talking about today. We have an hour, and as with every other topic, there is so much that we wish we could cover. So really our focus today, as we think about new and emerging leaders, is to provide you with some tools and a process that you can use as you think about evaluation and quality improvement. We also want to, at the end of the presentation, you'll see that there are a tremendous number of resources that you can look to as you think about evaluation. We're also mindful that for some of you, you will have quality improvement experts in your organization or evaluators, and for others, this is something that you will need to do as you go through and think about your teams and your programs. So we want to try to balance information that could assist you both ways. So we will do some evaluation basics. We will talk about some theory and give some examples, but we also want to provide a hands-on application process. So you'll see as we go through that we'll be inviting you into a bit of reflection as you think about a program that you might want to evaluate in the near future. As always, we start by looking at our console. We're so familiar with this now. We've been at it for 9 months or more. And so a reminder that we do have the comment box and the question box. Kathleen, of course, is always with us as well, making sure that our technology is working effectively. So please put any question in there that you might need answered. You are all muted right now, but please raise your hand. We're keeping an eye on that as well to be sure that we make sure that we answer your questions. And we will be looking at handouts. The link to the polls is the first, and you'll also see another one there, a template that we'll be using throughout the process. And so we thought we would start. If you can click on the link to the polls, there's 2 questions that we thought we would start with. So click on the link, I'll take you there now. And the question is, from your experience, what makes for an effective evaluation? So this is one of those polls where you can like other comments that people have made and of course add your own. So we'll give it a moment to see what people are commenting. So again, you have to go to your handouts, look at the link that says link to polls, and you should be able to answer just as you are. Great. So what makes for an effective evaluation? Data, absolutely. It encompasses all aspects of the role over a defined period of time. Yes, it's objective, an objective framework, starting by being clear about what you're actually evaluating. Yes, we'll talk about that a lot today, actually. Negotiations, interesting. Planning in advance for metrics to be measured. Specific feedback with examples. Yes, input from staff and direct supervisors. We'll talk about the role of stakeholders today. Clarity at the beginning. Absolutely. Two-way communication coming up. Allowing enough time for the evaluation. This is a really important consideration as we go through today. We'll talk about that as well. It balances qualitative feedback from staff and clients as well as quantitative information. Yes. Constructive feedback. Clear communication, active listening, and clean information. Or clear information, sorry. Yeah, that starting by being clear about what you are actually evaluating is a big part of what we're going to focus in on today. Evaluation, as you know, can be simple as a reflection as well as really comprehensive evaluations. We want to really think through. I love that statement, measuring what matters, leaving out what does not. Yeah, narrowing in on what is that one evaluation question. Gerda always comes back to us on that. Clearly understand what you are evaluating: time, outcome, quality. Absolutely. So some excellent points that you're making tells us that you've done this before and you've got some really good information. So the second question is just stay there on your polls for now. And the second question that we're moving to is, from your experience, where does evaluation often fall short? So what are some of the pitfalls that we want to be thinking about as we think about an evaluation? Yeah, not being objective, lack of examples. Yeah, data collection. And this is, again, something that is really hard, is how are we going to gather the data? Where are we putting it? How are we compiling it? Who is analyzing it? How do we, develop recommendations past that? So yeah, lack of clear objectives being gone, unclear parameters, what's being evaluated and why. Yeah, it doesn't happen at all. Absolutely. And a good example of this is, we sometimes collect, evaluation at the end of our workshops, and they're kind of sitting in a pile and we wonder what to do with them. And this is something that happens a lot, and it doesn't necessarily inform us to continue to improve. Not considering impact on participants, lack of data or poor data collection, no specific examples, too much information with no clear action plan after, not made relevant to everyday responsibilities. Great things to think about. So in our little hour workshop, we're going to try to address some of the things that, that you're articulating here. Preconceived end results, waiting too long to evaluate, absolutely. Okay. So I'll ask you to minimize your polls and come back to GoToWebinar, and you should be able to see the slides again. So if you're having trouble, unmute or let us know, but look for the GoToMeeting icon, the webinar, and you should be able to be back here. So thank you for that. It gives us good context as we're moving forward. And so evaluation, if we're thinking about it in a very specific way, it's a systematic process of collecting information for a specific purpose and use. So why are we collecting it? How are we collecting it? Evaluation is action-oriented. So sometimes we get stuck on research and evaluation. And evaluation really is about the ongoing work that we can do to continue to improve, which is how it ties into quality improvement. So that's the perspective we're taking today. So it's a program piece that you're doing to continue to make it better and make a greater difference for the people that you're serving. A tool to help organizations make decisions and to take appropriate action. So what we want to do is just show you a very brief video that helps perhaps understand what this is about. So here we go. I'll show you the video now.
So when people ask me what I do for a living, I usually say that I try to help organizations answer 3 questions. What, so what, and now what? So the what question really goes to, what is an organization doing? What are they putting out into the world? The so what question goes to, so what does it all mean? So we're doing all of this work. Is it actually making the world a better place? Is anything actually happening? Are we creating a better world because of it? And then I go to the now what question, which is, now we have all this information, what can we do about it? So how does an organization go from good to great based on the information that I can give them? So that's how I tend to describe things to people in a very, simplistic kind of way.
So we're going to try to stick to that framework of what, now what, and so what. Hoping you can see my screen there. Oh, let me just be sure. There we go. And if you can't, just write it on the questions there, and we'll try to make that better, but hopefully you can. And so really, we want to do it again for improvement. Sometimes it's accountability to funders, but really here, we want to focus beyond outputs to process or outcomes. It helps us prioritize where we spend our resources, helps us sometimes to determine a case for change or a case for a program. It helps us to provide credible information to the board in our annual reports to committees about the program. Helps us learn so that we can make the program stronger, and hopefully we can also measure the difference that the program is making in the lives of the people that are part of the program. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gerda to talk a little bit about the types of evaluation. So I'll go off camera there.
So hi, And yeah, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the common types of evaluation. Really, there's a lot of language that you'll probably hear when it comes to evaluation. In fact, Glass, an evaluator back in the 80s, said that evaluation is what people say it is. And right now, people are saying it's many different things. A common illustration is a tree. And on the tree, there's a lot of different branches of evaluation. And it could be one of the branches is valuing, one's utilization, one is theory. This slide, with this slide, what we want to do is just give you a little bit of a taste of the different kinds of evaluation, what you'll probably have heard, and what they're used for. So there is a school of thought that would say that research is an type of evaluation when there's not a lot already known about a particular area. When you're designing a new program, developmental evaluation is often an approach that's used. It's when you don't really know what you're doing exactly, but you're monitoring it and making changes on the way. Then there's monitoring performance measurement, which is really important. There's a lot of tracking of the outputs, and that feeds right into evaluation that asks the what, so what. And then there's the process part, which is how are we actually doing implementing the program, and questions that relate to that. And then finally, what changes because of the program, so that'd be impact evaluation. So if we go to the next one, evaluations really have, there's core standards, and the Canadian Evaluation Society is a leader in the world, I would say, for setting up these core, the framework of the core standards of utility, feasibility, propriety, accuracy, and accountability. So when you're doing an evaluation, you're thinking about, are the evaluation processes and outputs, the products, are they actually going to be useful for meeting stakeholder needs? And whoever that stakeholder might be, it might be the decision maker, but it might also be the population that's being evaluated, or part of the participants in the program as an empowerment type of evaluation. Is it feasible? So do we have the time, the resources? Do we have the data? Has it been in place long enough for us to actually do this evaluation? Not everything needs to be evaluated. Sometimes it's just not worth it. The information you get might not be used for anything. Then there's the propriety standard. What's fair, proper, legal, right, and just? So what steps do we need to take in order to make this an ethical and inclusive kind of evaluation? There's accuracy. So is it credible? What do we need to do in order to make it credible? Who do we need to talk to? Who do we need to include? What design do we need in order for it to be credible? Do we just want to talk to a certain subset? Then do we need to be clear about that? And then there's the accountability part of it. And that really speaks to documenting. How did you go about your evaluation, so that somebody else could look at it and go, you know, what about this? What about that? Why didn't you ask this? Or why did we try that? And it's a way of just checking and making sure that your evaluation is one that can stand up to some kind of scrutiny. The next slide. So when you look at how to do evaluation, one thing that's really important is that it is not a linear process. It is not even necessarily circular. It's very, very iterative. So we often say we start at the planning, and then we do, and then we study, and then we act, and then we plan and do, study and act. But what you'll often find is that as you're moving through the planning process, say developing your data collection tools as part of the planning process, you go back to the evaluation question. Well, you know what, I need to tweak that a little bit. You start implementing and monitoring data collection. You go, at this point, you really don't want to change a whole lot, but you might have to adapt the plan. And then when you're in studying it, you're looking at, this is where you can actually see sometimes not just what are we learning from what people are telling us, but what did we learn about the evaluation process itself, the design that we used? Where did this maybe not work the way we thought it was going to work? And then the ACT part includes that reporting and the communicating of results. And developing the recommendations and actionable ideas. This can be, traditionally, it's been the evaluator coming and saying, here's what you need to do, but in fact, it can be a very participatory process. And then the next would be determining the next steps, which again is a very collaborative and participatory process. It need not be expensive, complicated, or time-consuming. Some evaluation is better than none. And that's about putting in an evaluation mindset. Some of the real-world challenges are things like resistance to evaluation, people who don't really want the program evaluated, or maybe they've had a bad evaluation experience. Maybe there's misuse. Well, we don't really want you to talk about that. We only want to look at this. Cultural considerations. So what do we need to do in order for this evaluation to be culturally inclusive? Or what do we need to know that maybe our interpretation has to be affected by by different considerations? And the context in which the evaluation is being done. So again, if things are changing rapidly, that's a real challenge when you're trying to implement an evaluation that's got a nice little plan. This is where the adaptive plan, if needed, comes in. Sometimes that doesn't work so well if you get rigid and stuck in the plan. Okay. Next slide, Maria. Oops, I'll stop.
Great, thank you so much. So we want to, as I mentioned earlier, and Gerda alluded to, we want to give you an opportunity to practice with one framework. So you'll know with evaluation, there are many different ways of putting an evaluation together, a program evaluation together. And this really falls under that plan piece. How do we plan for one? We were thinking of a simple approach to it, even though you'll see that there's still many elements and aspects to make it have some rigor and to answer to go along with some of the comments that you made about how you collect it and where you collect it and how you use it. So in your console, you'll notice that there's a handout called Evaluation Plan Template. There's a PDF there as well. I invite you to open it if you would like. And use it as we go along, or just at least with pen and paper to write down some responses as we go through. And so for those of you who are taking the certificate portion of this will be a portion of what you'll need to do is actually complete the evaluation template. So you may want to jot down some notes as you go through. It's helpful as we go through this for you to be thinking about a program that you're thinking, I wouldn't mind evaluating one aspect of this program. So think about one program that you can actually walk the steps with us on, and as we'll give you a bit of time to jot some notes on that program as we go through the different steps. So if you open up the template, you'll see that the first piece, and we're trying to use the exact same format that's there so you can follow along. The first piece of it is really writing some background and context. And so sometimes what we do is and I tend to do this, is I want to kind of gloss over this stuff because I think, well, come on, we've been doing this for so long. How can we not know what the background and context is? But in fact, if you've been doing it for a really long time, sometimes it's really important for you to do this because we sometimes lose sight of why we're doing a certain program. And so the types of things that we want you to think about is the program that's being evaluated. So just think about it and write the name if you can as we go along. And then ask yourself, why am I wanting to, or why are we wanting to evaluate it right now? Now, you don't have to go into detail here, but what is it? Is there some level of dissatisfaction with it? Like maybe you're thinking our enrollment has really gone down. I'm not even sure we're serving the people that we were supposed to serve. We get people, but I'm not sure it's the target audience that we were thinking about initially. The funder might be asking you, the program might be in question. You might be being asked about the difference it's making or how effective it is. So really getting down to just a bit of a sense of why do we want to do this? Also, other things that you might want to think about, what else needs to be taken into account? For example, I have a limited budget or no budget. I want to think about what the timing of it is. Is this the right time to be doing this evaluation, perhaps as that cycle ends? And what stage of development is it at? So here you might want to think about, for example, is it a new program? So is it a needs assessment, a concept? Are you wanting to assess how the program was developed? Is it a program that is more stable and mature, or it's at the end? And this helps us to understand perhaps what type of evaluation that we want to do. Are we talking about outcomes? Are we talking about the process, a needs assessment? What is it that we're wanting to do? What do we need to take into account? And then finally, who's going to use this data? So for some of us in evaluation, you might think it's just going to be my team. We just want to know a little bit more, and that's where it's going to go. Perhaps it's going to go to my director, the executive, the board, the funders, but we want to have a sense of who's going to be actually using this information moving forward. So I'll give you a moment to just think about what it is that you would be considering as a program. Just jot down some notes on it here. And so following that, the next piece, and again, this is another discipline piece to do, because again, it's easy to step and not think about this as we want to just get right into what are we measuring and how are we going to measure. But the template gives us a step-by-step process of things for us to consider. And again, helpful for you as a leader to know if someone's coming in to do an evaluation, here's the things I'm expecting. If I'm doing an evaluation, or if someone who works with me on my team is doing an evaluation, I want to have a tool that helps them to get through some of these steps. So around stakeholder analysis, what we want to ask ourselves is, who will be affected by the evaluations process or its results? So we want to think about it. It's typically program staff and program participants. So we're going to run an example through today, just to give you an idea of the type of information that you would be collecting. And so here, it's a program, a pregnant teens program. And what we want to think about is the fact that we want them to be involved so that they give us an idea of the program's strengths, weaknesses, benefits. But if there are non-participants, we want to see if we can get the voice from their perspective of why they're not. Is it that maybe it's not relevant, if there's barriers to getting here? So we also, through this, I want to ask about ethical considerations. Do we need to be mindful of how we're asking, what information we're asking for and how we're asking it? Are we being clear with what we're doing with the information? What type of consent do we need to share? Are we going to explain clearly that this is voluntary and that they do not need to participate? So all of those things here help us to understand the kinds of things we need to keep in mind when we think about stakeholders. Who else might contribute to the success of the evaluation? So again, thinking about it from a kind of a 360 perspective, we might want to say, are there others that might give us information? And so an example here would be community partners. So they might help us to understand or connect to people who aren't participating. They might hear about our program and we want to ask them, what are you hearing about the program? So they might help us understand. They might say, you know what, you're doing the exact same program as another organization. We're not sure why you're doing it. So all of that information from other stakeholders might be helpful. Again, who is going to use the evaluation? We've talked about that a little bit before. And who's going to be supportive? So who are your champions? And who are you going to lean on? If you don't know, then it's a question to ask. Do I need to ask for support from my director or executive director? Do I need to think about people who might not want this evaluation to happen, whether it's because there's evaluation fatigue, they're concerned, they're sometimes staff. I might be some of the people that may not want the evaluation to happen because they're worried about their program, or they develop the program and they don't want to see any changes to it. So it's just a matter of us thinking about all of the different stakeholders so we can think about how it might respond. In all of the sheets, you'll also see that we've got these tips at the bottom that will help you hopefully moving forward as well. So with that, I will turn it back to Gerda to talk a little bit about the next steps in the template. And again, as we go through, if you can think about, okay, who would be some of those stakeholders that you need to be thinking about from the perspective of the program that you're considering at your organization. So to you, Gerda.
Thanks, Maria. So saw that in the early slides asking, when you were asked, what was it that sort of got in the way of an evaluation and what makes for an effective evaluation? We saw often people talking about clarity. And this basic program description, or developing a program description, really helps with that clarity question. What we like to, there are different ways of developing a program description. And what we're presenting here are two different ones. One, really getting into, okay, so who is this program for? What will be done with this program? And this is high level. This isn't getting into the details of that. Where and when is this program happening? How is it working? Is there a theory or a model on that, on which it's built? Is it a best practice that we're trying to model our program after another program? And why do we believe that this program will be effective? This often, if it's there may be an actual theory, a program theory that's research-based, or it may be just more intuitive. We've seen in our organization that when we do this, this happens. And along with every of these program descriptions, there are parallel or related evaluation questions that you can pull from there. So what we've done is we'll go through an example here on the program description. So for the who's the intended audience, who else is involved, and how. So the pregnant teens are part of, just following on that previous the project that we were talking about before. The intended audience are pregnant teens, and the program is staffed by peers and public health nurses. What's being done is a drop-in program is being delivered, and it's providing education and skill building, some social time, and that's so that teens will make healthy prenatal choices and have healthy birth outcomes. Where is it happening? It's happening in a neighborhood community center, and it's happening after school, and it's happening weekly. And how does it work? So we know from our work with teens that trauma-informed is important. They need a safe space. And the why do we believe this will be effective? Well, because of our research when we were developing the program, we found this to be a best practice. And so from that, there are related evaluation questions. Are we actually serving pregnant teens? What will be done? What was actually delivered? How does this compare? And as we move to the next slides, we'll see how that plays out in the next part of evaluation planning. But for now, what we'd like to do is for you to go through and think of your project, and maybe for one or two of those program description areas, write down write down your program details. Should we move to the next slide, Maria? So that information then leads you to the next part as to what's the evaluation purpose and the key evaluation questions. So if you think about the different types of evaluation, so some might be judgment oriented. Do we continue doing this program? Improvement oriented. How do we make this program better? Design oriented. So we wanted to make sure that we have a program that's safe. What does it take to actually make it safe? Knowledge oriented. We don't really know what it would take to engage people. So those kind of things that we would be looking at for purposes. And then from there, you develop the evaluation questions. So for example, in A, what part of the program do you want to know more about? Let's say we want to know more about the processes. So as a process focus, we want to inform changes or improvements. The questions that you would be asking are, what's happening? Who is it happening for? When is it happening? Where is it happening? How is it happening? And you're focusing in on those activities pieces and the inputs pieces. Then there might be an outcome focus. And that's to see how effective the program is in achieving the different changes. Maria? And then the outcome. So to identify results or effects of the program, what changed for whom, to what degree. And in this case, we're looking at things like knowledge, attitude, behavior, skill, status. By status, we mean things like health status or living status, and similarly circumstance, and might be related to employment. Has their circumstances in terms of employment changed? So kinds of questions that you could ask for that are going to come. Maria? To what extent are program participants making healthier prenatal choices? If you wanted to ask behavior, those would be a behavior kind of question. And a status kind of question would be at the end of the program. You say, how many program participants have actually had healthy birth outcomes? So if you want to move to the next slide. Actually, sorry. Could we go back, Maria? My apologies. So you're looking at maybe 5 to 10 questions at the most, and it'd be a combination of descriptive, so the what, the when, the where, and the analytic, the how, the why, the what changed. If you have no money, no time, even one question is good. And so now for you, turning again to your handout, thinking about your project, what would you use the evaluation for? Think about that. And then think about what part of your program you want to know more about. And write that down and maybe jot down an evaluation question that would be of interest to you. What is it that you want to learn that you don't already know? Okay, we can turn to the next slide. So then from there, we're moving into indicators. So an indicator really is the evidence that you need to gather the information. It is not, so if your outcome, for example, is people adopt healthy behaviors, then an indicator would be an approximation that would say, well, we think one way, what's one thing that would make us say that they were adopting a healthy behavior is that they're eating more home-cooked meals than they are eating McDonald's, for example. And so that would be an indicator, is an increase in the number of home-cooked meals a person eats. And it's tied back to the evaluation question. And it's at this point, too, that you might find that your evaluation question that you thought you had gets tweaked as you start finding the indicator. And it's called operationalizing it, making it real. And then from there, you go into, all right, so if I want to know if my indicator, if I want to actually gather data on my indicator, what actually do I need to gather? So if I'm asking, if I want to know if people ate more home-cooked meals, then the data I need to collect is feedback from participants on how many home-cooked meals they ate that week, for example. And where can we easily get this data? It might come from participants themselves, it's self-report. So in this, we'll walk through that same project to see how this flows through. So for the key evaluation question, the question that we're focusing on in our example is how effective is the program at engaging the target population? So our indicator there would be how many participants access the program at least once, and the percent of participants attending more than half of the sessions. So we really are interested in retention here. That's the kind of engagement that we're interested in. So what kind of data will we collect for that? We're going to collect number of unique participants and the number of times each person attends. So we're taking attendance, basically. And then our data source will come here. This is registration forms or attendance records. And these are things that you typically do when you're setting these sorts of things up. Think of them at the beginning of a program as a potential data source down the road. So how are they going to be most useful to me as an evaluator? How are they going to be most useful to me as someone who might want to say, all right, how can I use this data to inform my evaluation? And at the bottom, we have the tips again as to some things to think about, questions that will help you determine if the indicator is measurable. They can be quantitative indicators, those are numbers, and qualitative. And I noticed in the early poll that people talked about both kinds of data. And there are many data sources. And I also noticed earlier that sampling, the too small a sample was one of the challenges to an evaluation. And having multiple sources actually helps with addressing that sampling challenge. Because when you have programs with small numbers, that is an inevitability that you will have a small sample. And so having more than one data source is really helpful. You can go to the next slide. Oh no, sorry. Take a moment. Take a moment, think about your program that you're evaluating, and jot down a couple of indicators and the data that you might want to collect and the data source. So moving to the next slide, so in this, there's a lot of tables in this, isn't there? But really, when you're wanting to lay out an evaluation process that is one that is accountable and that is clear, where you can see what you're doing, this kind of an approach really does help. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is what you're going to show everybody, but it is something that will help you make sure that everything connects. So how will you gather and analyze the data collected? So now we're really getting down to the nitty gritty. And this is one place where you start to maybe look and say, wow, it was a great idea, but when we actually looked at it, this isn't going to work quite the way that we thought it was going to work. So maybe our data collection method, we thought that we would be able to pull from program records. When we actually get the program records, we might find, we can't use them as easily as we thought that we could. Maybe the way records were kept changed, and so they don't fit. Maybe there's a lot of holes in the data that's been recorded. That's a possibility. And so then we have to think about, well, maybe that's not as good a data source. Maybe we will need to turn to other ways of getting the information. So when will it be collected? Is it an ongoing thing? And again, thinking about evaluation, if you think about evaluation when you're starting your program, you're able to actually build in this type of a thing. Even if you come at it afterwards or partway through, you can start thinking about collecting data before the program is quote unquote done. Who's going to collect it? Will it be program staff? Will it be the evaluator? And some of this case, you have to think about cultural and ethical considerations. The implementation steps. So maybe, okay, we're going to do a survey. What will it take to actually put together a survey, and how long will that take us to do? We need to come together and we need to come up with a bunch of questions. We, of course, will have to tie them back to our evaluation question. And then we will want to pilot it, and then we'll want to, and then we'll actually have it go out. How long do we want it to go out for? In what form do we want it to go out? Do we want it just to be online? And then thinking about how it's going to be analyzed. So you gather all the information. It's good to think beforehand, what am I going to do with it when it gets back? So it's almost thinking about, when I ask this question, what will I do with it when I get the answers to it? And often it can be quite simple. Thematic analysis of qualitative data. So what are the patterns that we're seeing in the words? In Excel, you can use that for just average mean, median, mode kind of data, frequency data. Pivot tables, if you're familiar with those, are a really great way of using Excel to get at some cross tabulations to say, well, women say this and men say this, or youth say this and adults say this. So applying this to our example program, data collection method, I think we said was going to be program records, attendance and registration. And I think we said it was going to be ongoing by program staff. And the implementation step here was in setting up some kind of a system where the information could be reported so that it could be pulled. Even if it's saying, you know what, we're going to keep all our hard copies and we know that we're going to have to work with them at the end. It's possible. There's nothing wrong with that. How is it going to be analyzed? So for this particular case, you know, we're going to just use simple tabulation and calculations. And maybe you say, you know what, we're going to collect all this stuff and we're going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and we could actually pull information for that particular program for people a lot to say, here's who was in our program and here's what changed for the people who were in our program. So those are ways that it can be analyzed. So again, turning to your handout, really quickly sketch something out as to a possible data collection method and when you would collect it and what you think you'd need to think about to make that happen and what you would do with it when you got it. So moving to the next slide. Sorry, Marie.
I'm good. Thank you so much, Gerda. I'm noting a question that is being asked. Do you think validation of evaluation processes is better during or after? And I would say, and I think Gerda would agree, the best way to do evaluation is to develop the evaluation template or framework right away. And that way you're able to know what data you need to collect and you have the information. Gerda and I have been involved in lots of evaluations where you're called in after, which is okay because that's sometimes all you have. But then as Gerda was explaining, sometimes actually getting the data that you need to tell the story is much harder. So if you're able to do this work and have the discipline to do it ahead, it's better. One of the things that we also find is that we get over zealous with our evaluation templates. And so we want to evaluate something and suddenly it turns into a huge project that we all get really overwhelmed with. And then because it's so big, we actually lose steam for how to do it and or what the goal of it was. And we don't necessarily complete it. And, you know, so much of what you articulated at the beginning was related to that. So we encourage you to take small bites and steps, particularly if you aren't working with a quality improvement expert or evaluator in-house or external. When you have other resources, you can certainly use them to assist you. So sometimes with programs, what we say is, you know, take one question. What one thing, in addition to what funders are asking you for, because typically it's about outputs, and not always, because they do a lot of outcome stuff as well. But what is one thing that you might want to add to your evaluation this year? Something that you want to find out that you can do, that you can take a bite size for. So sometimes even with the way that we're going to collect data, collect it as a moment in time. So take a 2-week period to do the evaluation as opposed to the full year. Think about using easy ways to collect information. I think of a program that we did and we wanted to do a process evaluation. And what we did is we asked someone, everybody that walked in, if they could take a Post-it note that they got and they wrote down the time that they arrived and they wrote down the time that they saw the receptionist, then they wrote the time that they saw the person that they were coming to see, whether it was a social worker. And we just took that information to tell us a little bit about time and process. So it doesn't have to be complicated. The framework here helps you just be able to name and articulate what it is that you're trying to do and improve. What this does here, this evaluation matrix at the end of the template, is tries to synthesize and put it all together. So the template helps you to walk through and ask the right questions so you get down to what it is that you're evaluating and how you're going to do it. And what this does is it helps you to put it all together so that if you were looking at a one-pager that you wanted to talk from or submit or work out of, this would be it. So what is your evaluation question? So what's the participants, for example, in the example that we're providing might be what's the participant's experience with the program? What's going to be your indicator of success, program strengths and weaknesses? What data are we going to collect around it? Where are we going to get the information? How are we going to collect it? Who is responsible? This is the big one, okay? So we've got program strengths and weaknesses. They're going to be collected by location, schedule, content, and overall quality. That's the stuff that we're going to collect. Our sources are going to be participants, including those who have left the program. How we're going to interview people, and then who's responsible. Now, if you have an evaluator, that's fantastic, as it says here. But sometimes that is selecting someone in your team that's going to be leading the evaluation, as in they're going to be the person responsible to be sure that it's all taking place. And then we have to ask ourselves, who is going to analyze and theme the data? What we also find with the work that Gerda and I do in evaluation is that people get to about here. So they got the data, but they don't necessarily have the time to actually analyze it. So think about it again in small bites. What is it that we can do that's doable, that's going to inform us? Shrinking the process down to some specific QI pieces might be helpful. Bringing in an evaluation person that could help you do the theming, maybe another. But think about it. Again, sometimes you have the data, you just haven't worked through the data. And certainly that might be the place that you pull some resources together to do that. This is often the place, again, the analysis is the place where it's hard to find the time to actually pull the information together. So we hope that the template has helped you put thought and a methodology around how the evaluation can work. And so you've planned. That's, if you remember, the plan, do, study, act. We've just covered plan because plan is a really big component of it. And then obviously what you do is you do. And then the next piece is to study it. So that's, what I was just talking about in terms of analyzing and synthesizing. So you do want to think about it right from the start, as Gerda talked about. How are we going to analyze the data? Often in surveys, what we find is people want to put more and more and more questions in, and you need to ask yourself, what are we going to do with that information? If you're not sure and you're just curious, it may not be a question worth having, because think about the analysis at the end and who's going to be doing that. And if you're going to overwhelm that, it might just be better to pull it back. As all of us know, we're also finding that if the survey's long, people don't tend to finish it. So think about what you're going to do with the data, how you're going to analyze it. Then of course you have to synthesize it across all the data sources and answer the evaluation question. So you go back to, what was my evaluation question? And did I get the data? And that's what you're answering. Here's what we set out to evaluate. Here's our response to that. Compare that to the results of what we defined as success. What were we hoping for? And again, you just go back to your template because it's there. And then you're able to say, okay, like this example, the program was set at a target of 100 people participating, perhaps set by the funder, and the actual results was 120. But we want to measure that not just by the number of times, not just by the number of people, but by the number of times people came. So you go back to your success and you measure it. So that's why you set that up right at the beginning. And therefore you draw conclusions. It was successful or not successful, or here's where we need to improve. Here's what our delta is. And then you integrate the answers into a high-level report. Okay? So that's a kind of the step-by-step process. You analyze, you synthesize, you compare, you draw conclusions. And then you act. And so that's another thing that tends to happen, is sometimes we have these really comprehensive reports and we circle back to organizations and they haven't really done a lot with the information. So there's others, some of you who are on here, who do a great amount of work with your recommendations and data. So you really want to think about, what does our act look like? What are the recommendations? How are we going to communicate it back to the people who participated, back to the key people that you said were really important in the evaluation? And then what are our next steps? And how are we going to ensure that those next steps take place? So when we think about it, just think about it right again from the start. What's my recommendation? Who am I communicating this to? And my recommendation should be tied to, here's the next step that we're going to take in that process. So we finish that plan, do the evaluation study, and act as we go through. And again, this doesn't have to be really long. You could do a quick evaluation for a program where you just want to find out certain elements of it as you move forward. Try to keep it simple, particularly if you don't have outside or inside evaluation resources. So we want to finish by talking a little bit about resourcing your evaluation and then on culture. So think about your evaluation budget. If you do have some evaluation dollars, think about where in that template you want to best use those resources. So for example, it may be that your team develops the template and you have an evaluator come in and just say, do we have it right or not? It could be that you make sure you're collecting all the information and you have someone come in to analyze. If it's comprehensive and you're lucky enough to have resources, you have someone working with you alongside. And evaluations, as Gerda mentioned, are no longer just third-party, far away, objective. There's an element of that, but there's also a real element of action-based, co-creation, collaborative approach, ongoing, systematic approach to evaluation that we invite you to think about, so that someone is with you along the journey and you're okay to change how the evaluation is going based on the information that you're finding out. Remember, primarily evaluation is to serve you and your team and to improve the program. So think about how you might mix those or how you might use the resources that you have most effectively. And we want to talk a little bit about this idea of developing a culture of evaluation or a learning evaluation or learning culture within your organization. So this quote is helpful. For an organization to develop and sustain evaluative capacity, it must have leaders who at the very least not only value evaluation and learning, but more importantly, practice evaluative thinking. So we've worked with organizations that have good data, but weren't sure what to do with it. And so, you know, sometimes we see in strategy things like using data for effective decision making. And so sometimes as leaders, part of your question is, what are we doing with the data we already have? How do we pull that data and use it to make the best as possible? We worked with an organization that again had a lot of data, and we got it down so that every team got their data on a quarterly basis, and they were invited to look at the data through that lens that we talked about at the beginning. What is the data saying? So what does it mean? And now what? And those teams, every team then had to report on what it was that they were doing with the data results. It may be that all you have is the data that funders are collecting, but we invite you to think about, how do I get that data early so that it informs me in my planning, whether it's annual planning or quarterly planning? How do I create within my team even a culture in which we're using data regularly? That might be funder data again, it could be workshop data that you're using, it could be satisfaction tools, it might be perceptions of care tools, whatever tools you're using. Often we're collecting it, but we're not using it to inform us. So being able to set some very simple process like the what, now what, so what process within your team allows you to be able to get into that mindset of using and reflecting on data to continually improve. So here's some indicators from famous Michael Quinn Patton. If there's one person that I might recommend, Gerda might think differently, to read in terms of social evaluation, I would highly recommend Michael Quinn Patton. And so he talks about evaluation is central to the work rather than an add-on or end of project activity. So again, the discipline here, if you're starting something new, if you're tweaking, is to start with the question, what's the impact, what's the process, and how are we going to evaluate the results of it? Really helpful as a leader to be thinking from that lens. There's many lenses, of course, as leaders that you need to be thinking about, but certainly this is an important one as well. So again, activity. So I'm not doing it just because the funder told me. I'm not doing it just because accreditation told me. I'm doing it because it's really good practice. And often what we talk to teams about is you have what the funders are requiring you. What is one thing that your team wants to learn on in addition to that this year? So we've had organizations, for example, that have said, we want to find out more about mental health related to clients in a simple way. And they've used one tool for the year across all programs to help them answer that question. Very simple tool, already research-based, best practice, so they can take the confidence of that and then learn from it to then inform programming in the year. So think about it from that. How do I add to my knowledge? How do I know, for example, what difference our program is making? There's thinking about the kinds of information needed for learning and improvement. So again, this is a culture of quality improvement that you're creating, constantly thinking about how do I innovate? How do I make better? How do I learn? How do I reflect on? A big piece of this is now moving towards client-based or experience-based co-design, where we take the experience of those who've used our services and they help us co-create the next level of our program by taking their experience and their evaluation of that experience and moving it forward. And then the idea, again, of you reflecting on evaluation findings and lessons learned. So again, that process, what can you build into your team that helps you to think about, okay, let's pause. What did we learn from that? Maybe you just ran a massive event. Obviously in COVID, you'd be thinking about virtual learning. What are we learning? Even if you had in your team time a place where you wrote, here's what I'm learning, and you kept track of it. And at the end of every quarter, you said, what are the types of things that we said? How is this informing us? There's an intention to implement improvement based on what is learned. So that's the so what, now what? High quality evaluation feed into program and organizational decision making. And again, asking ourselves, what data do we need to make informed decisions? Timed and resources are allocated for reflection. And again, this doesn't necessarily mean it has to be about dollars. It's about, and I know it's very, very tight these days, but your time. So again, where do I embed that into what I do for myself, what I do with my team? You share what you learn with your stakeholders and explain how it informs decision making. And I'll allude to that, and it's something that Gerda and I find often is that people want to participate, sometimes maybe a little less so, if they know they're going to hear about what difference their participation made in it. So how do we circle back to the people that we asked for feedback to say thank you, and here's the result? And it's certainly one I find that even we are missing. We have a hard time with that because we're on to the next thing. But even in your own process, what do we do to help people say thank you, but also here's what we've learned from what was shared? So lots in this webinar about evaluation. Our hope was to give you one way of doing it so that you'll have a methodical approach if you hadn't had one before, and also understand that there's many, many tools. At the end of the slide deck that Kathleen has also posted already, you'll see that there are many resources available and some really good tools that are also developed. For those of you who are doing the certificate, there are 2 questions. This is due January 25th. So when it comes to having an evaluation mindset, where are you at? Your team, your organization, what needs to be strengthened? How could you contribute to strengthening the culture of learning in your organization? So that's that last part of what we talked about. Most importantly, we want you to leave with an evaluation and quality improvement mindset. And then the second part is to finish up that evaluation template that you will have in PDF and in Word. And it's a matter of completing it and really keep it simple. So really think about 2 to 3 questions max and walk them through the evaluation template. And then, really think about the challenges that you anticipate in implementing it and how you might address those as well. So on that note, we would love to hear what this was like for you. So going back to the links to the poll, if you could go there and just let us know your thoughts. And again, there's the tools and resources. I'll go through those in a moment. There they are, so you can see what's available for you. And we'll close off, as we often do, with that next question. How is this? What's one word to describe how you are leaving our session? I'll ask you to write the word and come back so you can see the results from your colleagues. So we got informed, helpful. I like that, kiss. Thank you. Encouraged. I think that's for you, Gerda. Engaging. Keep it simple. I think that's what you're saying to me, stupid. Yes, keep it simple. Organized, eager, yay. Yeah, confused. Feel free to reach back to us. That was a lot of information. We're happy to work with you to support you as you go forward. Validated, excellent, helpful, engaging. Yeah, for many of you, I mean, this is your field or you've been doing this for a while. We'd love to hear from you too. What else could we have added or changed as we go forward? Encouraging. All right, so on that note, thank you very much for being with us again. We'll see you back on January 25th. We have 2 left to finish off this webinar series. Thank you very much and have a lovely season off, hopefully for some of you. Thank you. Bye-bye.